If you've ever wondered why some people succeed financially whilst other people struggle, or how your emotions shape your financial decisions, then you're in the right place. So, 2 years ago, I picked up The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, and boy, did this book change my life. So, in today's video, I'm going to go over 6 of the key lessons that resonated with me the most throughout this book. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Okay, so the first lesson we have is that money is one of the few domains in life where novices can beat out experts. And to illustrate this, Morgan Housel uses a story of a guy named Ronald Reed. So there was this low-income janitor who worked in Vermont and passed away in 2014. And in his will, he mysteriously left over, I think it was $2 million or pounds to his stepchildren, whilst also leaving an additional $6 million for his local library. And naturally, this raised a lot of questions. Like, how on earth did a guy who worked at the local gas station manage to accumulate all of this money? And as it turned out, the way he did this is by consistently investing a small portion of his salary into a number of blue chip stocks over his entire career. Now, whilst each individual payment would have been small and on their own insignificant, the power of consistency and compounding, which I'll touch on later, allowed that money to grow exponentially over time. Around the same time, there was another Harvard MBA educated student who made millions throughout his career in the early 2000s, but he ended up going bust and filing for bankruptcy in 2008 due to being over-leveraged and having a series of poor financial habits. Which again raises the question of how can a janitor outperform a Harvard educated financier when it comes to managing their money? Like, usually if you're an expert in a particular field, you'd expect to perform better than somebody who's a novice. Like, if I was performing a heart operation, like a surgery, you'd expect the doctor with a Harvard level qualification to outperform somebody who's not qualified. But when it comes to managing your own personal finances, the guys in the city or on Wall Street don't necessarily always do better. And actually, I remember during my first year of university, I did an internship at a US private bank in Canary Wharf. And I remember speaking to some of the people there, and they were all talking about how they'd already spent their entire paycheck for the month within the first week, and they weren't quite sure how they were going to get through for the rest of the month. And this had me thinking, like, these are men in their 30s advising some of the richest ultra high net worth individuals on the planet, and they don't even have their own personal finances in check. And that's because being good with money has just as much, if not more, to do with your own behavior and psychology than what it is you specifically know. And that's why a janitor from Vermont can outperform somebody with a Harvard MBA. And that leads us nicely onto the next lesson, which is the power of compound interest. So there's this quote about Warren Buffett, who's a legendary billionaire investor. Some would say he's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, of our time. And the quote goes something amongst the lines of, I think $81.5 billion of Warren Buffett's $84.5 billion net worth came after his 65th birthday. Like, that's just crazy when you think about it. Like, this guy who's been investing since the age of like 10 and is currently in his 80s made most of his billions in the past 15 years. And the main reason Morgan Housel cites for this phenomenon is the power of compound interest, which, if you've ever watched any personal finance video before, you'll know is a salient backbone of this topic. And essentially the idea is that instead of our wealth accumulating linearly over time, which is how our brains are naturally programmed to think, it instead accumulates exponentially. So if your investments rise by 10% a year and you currently have $100 sitting in your account, you wouldn't just be making $10 a year. You'd make $10 in year 1, $11 in year 2, $11.10 in year 3, and so on and so forth. And because our brains just can't seem to hack this concept intuitively, it leads us to underestimating the impact that time in the market has on our performance. It's why people always say that time in the market beats timing the market, or I think it's that Malcolm Gladwell rule where if you want to get good at something, you need like 10,000 hours of practice at it. In fact, I remember a few years back, Marcus Brownlee did a podcast with somebody, and he was saying that if you've been making videos on YouTube for like 10 years straight and doing a thing like that, after 10 years of doing that thing consistently, it's pretty difficult to not be at least reasonably competent at that thing. And if you're an investor, that can be quite annoying because you could spend so much time, hours, days, even months or years of your life optimizing every small aspect of your portfolio and your investment strategy, when at the end of the day, the majority of your returns are going to be dictated by time, which to some extent is outside of your control. And that actually leads us nicely onto our next lesson, which is to do something that economists always tell us not to do, and that's to not be rational. So hear me out. So the idea here is that a lot of the time, our motivation to stick to a particular course of action depends a lot more on how we feel about the thing, as opposed to how rational that thing is. So for example, financial analysts will often teach that if you have a low interest rate on your debt, let's say your mortgage, let's say it's 5%, and at the same time, you can make a much higher return on your investments, let's say, I don't know, 15%. In that case, it would be optimal to allocate any money that you have into those higher return investments, because you can profit off the difference between the 15% you're getting on your investments and the 5% cost of your debt. And that's what the conventional wisdom teaches us. But a lot of the time, for a lot of people, having a $300,000 debt over their head, it makes it quite difficult to sleep easily at night. And so we might say in that a case like this, paying off something like your mortgage early would be reasonable, but not necessarily rational. Or to give you a non-finance example, let's say that you absolutely love the dumbbell bench press when you're in the gym, but you cannot stand the barbell bench press. Now, if I was designing a workout routine for you, I'd encourage you to program in the dumbbell press over the barbell press. Even though the barbell bench press is more conducive to progressive overload and gaining more strength over time, the fact of the matter is, if you enjoy the dumbbell press a lot more, you're more likely to stick with it in the long run and benefit from the returns of compound interest that we just discovered in the previous lesson. So the next lesson which really resonated with me was this idea that nothing in life is free. And as a trained economist, this is a principle that you're taught all of the time, that all decisions in life involve some sort of a trade-off. And the relevance of this principle here is that a lot of the time, a lot of people are deterred from investing because of the risk of losing money. And Morgan Housel tries to tackle this by framing the risk of losing money as essentially being the price that you pay for enjoying all of the gains in the stock market. And he likens the stock market to something like Disneyland, like this amazing land where you can unlock so many different opportunities, but there's an entrance fee that you have to pay to enjoy those benefits. And that price in this context is volatility or risk. And essentially that's the intuition behind the famous risk-reward trade-off that you see in financial economics, where assets with higher returns are often riskier. So the next time you're worried about risk or volatility with an investment, just remember, risk can simply be thought of as the price that you pay for the rewards that you get in the market. Okay, so the final lesson that really resonated with me was this idea that wealth is what you don't see, as opposed to what you do see. And when I read this, I was kind of shocked at just how intuitive it sounds. And the way Morgan Housel explains it is that he asks if you saw somebody driving around in a $100,000 car, you wouldn't necessarily know how rich that person is. But what you do know is that that individual has $100,000 less than he would have done had he not bought that expensive car. And so having lots of fancy possessions, yes, it can signal that you earn a high income or that you just took out a load of debt. But that's not the same thing as being wealthy, because wealth is the income that you don't spend. And this principle probably explains why Ronald Read, that famous gas janitor that we saw in the first lesson, shocked the world when he passed away, because nobody knew anything about his wealth because it was all hidden. And so the next time you see somebody with loads of fancy possessions, just remember, the value of those possessions is all money that that individual no longer has because it's money that's been spent. So yeah, those were just a few of the many lessons from the psychology of money that resonated with me. They're not the only ones, and if I went through all of them, we could talk about this all day. So if you found any of this content interesting, definitely give the book a read. And if you like this style of video where I cover lessons I've learned from a particular book, let me know in the comments down below, because I do appreciate it. It's quite different to what I usually cover, which is tech. But yeah, otherwise I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.